Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in life when the people who once ignored you, dismissed you, or took you for granted suddenly realize what they lost. But by then, it's too late. They didn't see your worth when you were giving your best. They overlooked you when you were trying to be seen. You poured into them, supported them, and stayed loyal even when they gave you nothing in return. And now they're regretting it. Now they wish they had treated you differently. But you know what? That door is closed. That season is over. And it's too late to turn back now. It's a hard truth of life. People rarely recognize the value of something or someone until it's gone. We live in a world where familiarity breeds complacency. When someone is constantly present, consistently giving, and always available, it's easy for others to take them for granted. The human tendency is to overlook the steady and reliable, thinking it will always be there. But when that person finally walks away, when the constant support is withdrawn, and when the well of unconditional love runs dry, that's when reality hits. That's when regret sets in. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone dismiss or mistreat a person who is genuinely loyal to them? Maybe you've been that person. You gave your heart, your time, your energy, and your loyalty to someone who didn't see it. You were always there when they needed you. You forgave them even when they hurt you. You supported them even when they didn't deserve it. And yet, they never acknowledged your effort. They never saw you. They assumed you would always be there no matter how they treated you. But here's the thing about human nature. People often assume that something valuable is only valuable when it becomes scarce or unattainable. Diamonds are precious not because they're common, but because they're rare. When you were giving all of yourself, they didn't feel the need to cherish you because they believed you would always be there. Your presence was expected, not appreciated. Your kindness was assumed, not honored. They saw you, but they didn't really see you. Then, one day, you woke up. You realized that you were giving more than you were receiving. You realized that your value wasn't tied to how much you could give to someone else, but rather to who you were at your core. You began to see your own worth, and that's when the shift happened. You stopped showing up the way you used to. You stopped answering every call. You stopped bending over backward to prove your value. You stopped settling for being tolerated when you deserve to be celebrated. And that's when they started to notice. Suddenly, the absence of your presence made them realize the weight of your value. They started to remember all the times you stood by them when no one else did. They started to replay the conversations where you offered wisdom, comfort, and strength. They began to feel the emptiness left behind by your departure. And that emptiness made them realize that what they had was rare, what they had was valuable. But by the time they realized it, it was too late. Regret is a powerful teacher. It shows people the truth about themselves and about what they lost. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. Their regret is not your burden to carry. It's not your responsibility to go back and try to ease their guilt. They had the opportunity to value you when it mattered. They had the chance to honor you when you were giving them your best. They didn't. And now that you've elevated, now that you've grown, you don't owe them access to the new version of you. People often realize the value of what they lost only when it's no longer available to them. But you are not obligated to make them feel better about the loss. You are not responsible for their regret. Your value was always there. It's just that they couldn't see it until it was gone. And by the time they see it, you've already outgrown the place where they left you. Let them regret it. Let them sit with the weight of their loss. But you keep moving forward. Keep thriving. Because your value was never dependent on their ability to see it. It was always there. There comes a point in life when you realize that not everyone will see your value. And that's not your fault. Sometimes people fail to recognize the treasure in front of them because they're not prepared to handle it. You may have been overlooked, undervalued, and taken for granted, not because you lacked worth, but because the people around you were too limited in their own understanding to see it. Your greatness was never the problem. Their inability to recognize it was. It's painful when people fail to see your value, especially when you poured so much into them. You gave your best. You loved deeply. You supported unconditionally. You showed up even when it wasn't convenient for you. And yet, they acted as if you were replaceable. They treated your consistency like it was nothing special and your kindness like it was owed to them. But here's the truth. Their failure to see your value doesn't diminish your worth. Just because someone doesn't see a diamond's brilliance doesn't make it any less valuable. Growth happens when you stop seeking validation from people who don't see you. It's easy to think that if you just give a little more, if you prove yourself a little harder, if you try to be what they want, they'll finally see your value. But that's a dangerous trap. The need for external validation will keep you stuck in cycles of disappointment and frustration. The turning point comes when you realize that your value isn't tied to how others see you, it's tied to how you see yourself. The moment you start to understand your own worth, everything changes. You stop begging for attention. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop lowering your standards to make other people comfortable. You begin to move differently. You start setting boundaries, not to punish others, but to protect the value of what you carry. And that's when the shift happens. That's when they start to notice. Suddenly, the same people who overlooked you begin to pay attention. When you stop chasing them, they start wondering why. When you stop making yourself available, they start feeling the absence of your presence. But by then, you've grown. You've evolved. You've discovered that you don't need their approval to feel valuable. Their recognition is no longer necessary for you to feel whole. Growth exposes the truth about the people around you. Some people were comfortable with you when you were insecure because it made them feel bigger. But once you discover your strength, once you start walking with confidence and purpose, their comfort is shaken. They see you thriving without their validation. And it forces them to confront the fact that they underestimated you. Their regret is not because they've suddenly discovered your value, it's because they've realized that you don't need them anymore. This is where you need to stand firm. Just because they now see your value doesn't mean you owe them access to your growth. The version of you they took for granted no longer exists. You've evolved. You've stepped into a higher understanding of who you are and what you deserve. Allow them to regret it. Let them sit with the consequences of their blindness. But don't shrink yourself to make them feel better about what they lost. Knowing your worth means understanding that not everyone is equipped to handle the fullness of who you are. And that's okay. Your job is not to convince them of your value, it's to walk in it. The right people, the ones who are meant to be part of your next chapter, will recognize your value without you having to prove it. The ones who missed it, that's their loss. And it's too late for them to try to catch up now. There's a painful truth about life. People don't always appreciate what they have when they have it. It's only after something valuable is gone that they begin to realize what they lost. This is why regret is so powerful. It's not just about the loss itself, but about the missed opportunity to value something when it mattered most. People rarely regret losing someone immediately. They regret it when they start to feel the emptiness left behind. They regret it when they see you thriving without them. They regret it when they realize they no longer have access to you. You gave them opportunities to cherish you, but they didn't take them. You showed up consistently, you supported them, you forgave them, and you stood by them even when they didn't deserve it. But instead of honoring that gift, they took it for granted. They assumed you would always be there. They believed that no matter how they treated you, you would stay. They miscalculated the depth of your strength. And when you finally had enough, when you finally chose yourself, that's when the shift happened. The day you stopped chasing, the day you stopped answering their calls, the day you stopped showing up to rescue them. That's when they began to feel the weight of your absence. Regret is powerful because it exposes the truth they refuse to see when you are right in front of them. It's not that they suddenly discovered your worth. They knew you were valuable all along. They just didn't think they would lose you. They thought you would keep tolerating the inconsistency, the disrespect, the indifference. They thought you would keep holding on no matter how many times they pushed you away. But when you walked away, they had to face the reality that they misjudged you. And that's where regret is born. Regret isn't just about losing you. It's about the fact that they had every opportunity to treat you better and they didn't. They think back to the moments when you gave them grace and they realize how rare that kind of loyalty was. They remember the times you stood by them when no one else did, and they realize how foolish they were to take that for granted. They look at you now stronger, wiser, more confident, and it hits them that they were part of the reason you had to grow through pain. That realization is hard to live with. But here's the truth. Their regret is not your burden to carry. You gave them enough chances. You gave them time. You gave them grace. They had every opportunity to love you, support you, and stand by you the way you did for them. They didn't. And now that you've elevated, now that you've healed, you don't owe them another chance. People tend to romanticize regret as if it's a sign of love. But regret is not love. It's an admission of failure. It's the realization that they could have done better, but they didn't. And that's not your problem anymore. You are not responsible for making them feel better about missing their chance. Let them sit with their regret. Let them process the weight of their own choices. When they see you thriving without them, they will regret not treating you better. When they see someone else appreciating you, they will regret letting you go. But by then, you will have already moved on. You will have already discovered that your value was never tied to their ability to see it. Their regret is a reflection of their failure, not your worth. They missed their chance. And now it's too late. It's easy for people to overlook you when you're in the process of becoming. When you were still figuring things out, still discovering yourself, and still learning how to stand on your own 2 feet. They didn't see you clearly. Maybe they saw you as ordinary, unremarkable, or just there to serve their needs. They were comfortable with you as long as you stayed small, as long as you remained dependent on them. They could handle you when you were uncertain, insecure, and still finding your way. But the moment you started to grow, the moment you began to elevate, that's when everything changed. Your growth revealed their blindness. It showed them that the person they took for granted was actually a rare and valuable gift. When you were pouring into them, supporting them, and showing up for them, they mistook it for weakness. They thought your willingness to give meant you needed them more than they needed you. They didn't realize that your capacity to give was a sign of strength, not desperation. They assumed that because you stayed through the hard times, you would always be there, no matter how they treated you. But then you grew. You evolved. You gained clarity. You started to see yourself differently. And with that growth came a new level of self-respect and confidence. You stop waiting for their approval. You stop adjusting yourself to fit into their limited view of who you should be. You stop shrinking to make them comfortable. And that's when they started to realize what they had lost. They didn't see your strength when you were quiet. They didn't see your potential when you were still developing. But once you started walking in your purpose, once you started to thrive without them, that's when their eyes were opened. Suddenly, the same person they overlooked became someone they couldn't stop thinking about. The same person they dismissed as too much or not enough became the person they now admire from a distance. But here's the hard truth. Their blindness was never about you. It was about their own limitations. They couldn't see you clearly because they were too caught up in their own insecurities, pride, or immaturity. They were comfortable with the version of you that served their needs. But once you began to outgrow that version, they couldn't handle it. Your growth forced them to confront their own lack of growth. It made them uncomfortable because it highlighted the gap between where you were and where they still are. That's why they regret losing you now. It's not just that you've become successful or confident. It's that your growth has made them realize how blind they were. They see you now, but not because you changed who you are. They see you because you've become too elevated to be ignored. You've stepped into your strength, and that strength exposes their weakness. They regret it because they now know they could have had a front row seat to your elevation, but they were too blind to appreciate it when it mattered. But their regret is not your responsibility. Their blindness was not your burden to fix. You didn't grow so that they would finally see you. You grew because you were always meant to. Your growth was not about them. It was about you stepping into the fullness of your identity. Let them regret it. Let them sit with the weight of knowing they underestimated you. Let them wish they had treated you better. But don't let their regret pull you back into a space you've outgrown. You owe it to yourself to keep growing. Keep walking with your head held high. Keep thriving. Their blindness was never your fault, and their regret is not your burden. Your growth exposed their limitations, and now that they see it, it's too late. Walking away is one of the hardest yet most powerful decisions you can make. It takes strength to let go of something you once invested in deeply. When you've given your heart, your time, your energy, and your loyalty to someone, the natural instinct is to hold on. You tell yourself that if you just try a little harder, if you're a little more patient, if you give them one more chance, they'll finally realize your value. But eventually, you reach a breaking point. Eventually, you realize that holding on is only breaking you. And that's when the real strength shows up. Not in fighting to stay, but in finding the courage to walk away. People think strength is about endurance, about how much you can take before you give up. But true strength is knowing when to stop giving. True strength is recognizing when you've done enough, when you've given enough, and when staying any longer will cost you more than you're willing to pay. The moment you decide to walk away is the moment you reclaim your power. It's the moment you stop allowing someone else's inability to value you to dictate your worth. When you finally walk away, it creates a shift. The person who took you for granted starts to feel the emptiness you left behind. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. They begin to realize how much you did for them, how much you tolerated, how much you sacrificed. But now it's too late. Your strength in walking away forces them to confront the truth. They lost something valuable, and they have no one to blame but themselves. is not that they didn't see your value. They saw it, but they assumed you would always stay. They mistook your patience for weakness. They assumed your forgiveness was unlimited. They believed that because you loved them, you would keep bending, keep adjusting, keep compromising. But when you walked away, you shattered that illusion. Your strength forced them to see that you were not desperate. You were loyal. You were not weak. You were patient. And now that you've left, they have to face the fact that they let someone rare slip through their fingers. Walking away isn't easy. You'll question yourself. You'll wonder if you made the right decision. You'll replay conversations in your mind and think about what you could have done differently. But deep down, you'll know that walking away wasn't giving up. It was choosing yourself. It was choosing peace over chaos, respect over tolerance, and self-love over approval. Your strength in walking away isn't just about leaving. It's about not looking back. It's about resisting the temptation to respond when they reach out. It's about not reopening the door when they realize what they've lost. The same strength that allowed you to leave is the same strength that will keep you moving forward. And that's what will make them regret it even more. When they see you thriving without them, when they watch you grow, when they hear about your success, they'll realize what they lost. They'll remember the times you stood by them when no one else did. They'll recall the grace you showed them, the loyalty you gave them, and the love you poured into them. But they also realize that they don't have access to that version of you anymore. You have outgrown the space where they left you. Your strength in walking away not only exposed their failure to value you, it set you free. Their regret will be heavy. They will wish they had treated you better. They will wish they had handled you with more care. But by then, you have already moved on. Their regret is not your problem. Your strength in walking away is a testament to your growth, your healing, and your self-respect. You walked away because you finally understood that you deserved more. And now that they regret it, it's too late. Moving on is not just about leaving the past behind. It's about stepping into the fullness of who you are without the weight of regret or bitterness. It's easy to get stuck in the aftermath of disappointment, replaying the memories and wondering how things could have been different. But true victory comes when you release the need for closure, stop looking for explanations, and decide that you don't need an apology to heal. Moving on is about realizing that your future holds more promise than anything you left behind. It's about understanding that your worth was never tied to someone else's ability to see it. At first, moving on feels like a battle. Your heart still remembers the moments when you felt valued, the good times that made you hold on for so long. The hardest part isn't walking away. It's resisting the temptation to go back. You might find yourself wondering if you made the right choice, questioning whether you should have stayed a little longer, given a little more. But deep down, you know that moving on was the best decision you could have made. It wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. It was you finally realizing that staying would have meant sacrificing your peace, your growth, and your self-respect. Moving on is your victory because it means you refused to settle. It means you recognized that you deserved better, even when they couldn't see it. The very act of moving on forces you to confront the truth about yourself and about them. You begin to realize that the version of you they mistreated was a version of you still in the process of becoming. But now you're different. You've grown. You've healed. You've discovered that your value was never dependent on their validation. That realization is powerful, it's freeing, and it's final. The people who regret losing you will try to reconnect when they see you thriving. That's how it always works. They see you glowing, successful, and at peace, and suddenly they remember what they had. They reach out with apologies and excuses. They talk about how they've changed and how they see things differently now. But moving on means you don't need to entertain that conversation anymore. You've already done the work. You've already healed. You've already built a life that no longer includes them. And that's your victory. Moving on isn't about trying to make them feel the weight of their mistake. It's about refusing to let their mistake define you. It's about walking confidently into your future, knowing that you are whole on your own. It's about building a life so full of purpose and joy that their absence becomes irrelevant. They may regret losing you, but that's not your problem. Their regret belongs to them. It's a consequence of their actions, not your responsibility to fix. Victory is found in the quiet confidence of knowing you don't need to look back. It's found in the peace that comes from knowing you made the right decision for your mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. It's in the strength that comes from knowing you are no longer tied to a place where you were undervalued. Your growth is proof that you survived the loss, and not only survived, but thrived. That's the victory. When they see you happy, successful, and unbothered, that's when the regret will hit them the hardest. They will wish they had treated you better. They will wish they had valued you when they had the chance. But by then, you will have already closed that chapter. You will have already moved on. And the beauty of moving on is that you no longer need their validation to feel whole. Your life, your peace, and your growth are the ultimate proof that you won. Moving on is not just an escape from the past, it's a triumph over it. And that triumph is yours to keep. Life has a way of teaching lessons through loss. The truth is, people don't always realize what they had until it's gone. They may have taken you for granted, misjudged your strength, and failed to see your true value when they had the chance. But their regret is not your responsibility. You gave them enough chances, enough time, and enough grace. You stayed when you should have left. You forgave when you had every reason to walk away. But when you finally chose to stand up for yourself, when you decided that you deserved more, that's when everything changed. Their regret isn't about you. It's about their own blindness and failure to value what they had. Your growth exposed their limitations. Your strength in walking away forced them to confront the truth they tried to ignore. And now that you've moved on, they're left to sit with the consequences of their choices. But that's no longer your concern. The real victory isn't in their regret. It's in your decision to keep moving forward. You've grown, healed, and discovered your strength. You've learned that your worth was never tied to their ability to see it. Now you stand taller, more confident, and more whole. Their regret may linger, but you've already won because you found the courage to walk away and the strength to never look back. Let them regret it. Let them wish they had treated you better. But don't let their regret hold you back. Keep thriving, keep growing, and keep walking confidently into your future. The chapter with them is over, and the best part of your story is still being written.